Level 1 thug to a level 100 mob boss. Quite the upgrade for Shigaraki Tomura, I do say so myself, because this episode is the birth of the symbol of evil, someone that will take the throne away from All for One. And this is a beautiful episode, and this is a great way to conclude MVA. So yeah, FYI, if you're unaware, this is the conclusion of the My Villain Academia arc in the anime. And so, before we go any further, I'm just extremely curious. Anime onlys, how did you feel about MVA? Now, I think everybody, if you have been paying attention to the community, you've probably heard off and on good and bad with the MVA in the anime, but I don't want to talk about any of that. I'm just curious what you all feel. Anime onlys, do you feel like this arc was good? Are you satisfied with it? And do you think maybe it met your expectations, or was it overhyped? I am very curious how anime onlys feel about the MVA arc in the anime. But with that out of the way, I'm just gonna say, hands down, this is the best episode of My Hero Academia Season 5, and probably my favorite episode of the entirety of My Hero Academia. Now, I am very biased when it comes to Shigaraki, and I am very biased to just some of the themes and the core elements that happen within this arc. I will 100% admit that. But I will say, in terms of art and animation and everything, this is a quality episode. You cannot deny. Obviously, it's not perfect, and there is some things that could have been better, but overall, this is a solid episode of My Hero Academia, and I felt like it fit everything that the manga gave, and once again, enhanced the themes from the manga to the anime. The adaptation was beautiful. So, let's actually get right into what this episode was about. So one of the core themes I think that anyone needs to take a notice of what this arc was trying to do was that it centers around one bad day. It's something I mentioned already when I talked about twice this episode, and then the previous episode, and now this episode I'm going to be talking about it, about how we see multiple times throughout this arc of My Hero Academia for MVA, where you have someone like Toga, you have someone like Twice, you have Shigaraki, Spinner, all of these characters that are a part of the League of Villains, now the Paranormal Liberation Front. They all had just one bad day that really just set their life down a path of no return. For instance, Toga, and how she kind of had her quirk take control of her. She couldn't resist her urges, and it led her down to where she's at right now. Twice as well, his misusage of his quirk to also being thrown out of a job led to where he's at right now. And Shigaraki, that one bad day with his family, he just had too much stress and build up and resulted into what he is now. The Spinner as well, you know, constantly being made fun of, prejudice and all that towards him. It's just like, obviously it led him down this path too. So we've seen multiple times throughout this arc where characters, they go down the wrong path because of just one bad day that separates them from being a normal human being or a normal hero. So I find that this arc is very fascinating for a variety of reasons, because it humanizes the villains, and that is something that is the biggest takeaway, I think, from MVA, at least for me. When I read this in the manga, it was the biggest takeaway, and I think many took the exact same vibe, is that one of the big points I think Horikoshi Sensei, the writer of My Hero Academia, was trying to kind of go for, was that he wanted to showcase that there isn't much of a difference between heroes and villains. Yes, one is obviously on the side of good, one is on the side of evil. They both have their differences, and obviously one kills people, one doesn't, but when you look at their circumstances, both sides could have been one or the other. For instance, if Izuku would have had a little bit of differences, he might have turned out like Gentle, he might have turned out like Shigaraki. That's the point here, is that because of just chance, luck, and all that, it really determined the outcome of these individuals, which goes back to the core theme of the first chapter of My Hero Academia and the first episode, where Izuku was narrating. He said he realized very early on that, you know, not everybody is equal, and that, you know, there is a lot of differences. Luck is kind of involved in your life, and that's basically what's happening here, is that Izuku is lucky that everything has turned out like it did, or he might be in the same shoes as Shigaraki at this moment of this episode. So that's the big point, the presentation point that Horikoshi Sensei has been trying to do for a very long time. But to kind of go a little bit deeper into this subject, let's talk about how this arc is very taboo. Because if you have not heard, even if you're an anime only or manga reader, this is very interesting to know, is that in Japan, it's very taboo to kind of showcase the villains like this in a shonen manga. Showcase the villains in a positive spotlight, like taking the place of the hero and showing them in a good light, like what we've had with the, the League of Villains. And there was a lot of backlash that Horikoshi Sensei got when he was writing this arc in the manga. There was a lot of people in the editing department, Shonen Jump and all that, and different people constantly saying, you shouldn't do something like this, it's not good, people are not going to like this. There was a lot of backlash, but Horikoshi decided to go against the grain, and he wrote this very unique and different arc for My Hero Academia, which is something that really stood out to me. It is an arc, hands down, that stands out. When you look at all the other arcs of My Hero Academia, MVA is definitely an outliner. It is something completely different than we've had to this very point. Yes, we've had moments to where we've seen Shigaraki and all that with his group, but we've never really seen the villains take the entire spotlight away from the heroes. And so it humanized our villains and made you even want to cheer for them, which I think is something, like I said, is not really, you don't see often. It's unique, it's different. The last time that I saw something like this when I was reading it in the manga was through Hunter x Hunter with, the Chimera Ant arc. If you've ever had the pleasure of watching Hunter x Hunter or reading the manga, then you know exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to Meruem. He was a character that was evil as it can get, but if you've actually watched or read it, you know what happens, and it is a very different take on how to do a villain story, especially for a shonen manga, and that's kind of what Horikoshi Sensei did with Shigaraki this arc, with MVA, is that he humanized all of them and made you understand them. And that, in some ways you kind of dislike the heroes because you like the villains more. But obviously there's so much more going on with this arc and this episode in general, and that is with Reed Destro. I feel like this is a big moment for Reed Destro's character, and one of the reasons why I became a big fan of him after this arc, just because of what everything kind of goes around him, like what he represents as a character, and how he acknowledged Shigaraki and even bowed down before him. So many that are probably watching this episode might have understood, but there is some chances that you might not be able to fully get a good grasp on everything going on. And the reason for that is not because none of you are dumb. I just am saying because they've cut some scenes out with Reed Destro. There has been some scenes in the MVA arc that have been cut for Reed Destro, and because of that cut content, I don't feel like everybody's going to be as attached to Reed Destro as what you should have been if you actually read it in the manga. This is probably one of the biggest flaws of MVA, and it's the one stain, big stain on the arc than anything else, is that because of some of the cut content, some of the characters that were introduced to MVA isn't going to be as likable or enjoyable, or maybe their full message is not going to be completely conveyed. But to kind of dive into what we know, and that's Reed Destro, is that he gave up. He's like, I picked a fight, I lost, any more fighting would result in meaningless deaths, I'm done. If you want to kill me, but the Meta Liberation Army is yours. And this is a big moment to kind of showcase the development of Shigaraki, but also Reed Destro's character development as well, is that if this would have been Shigaraki in previous seasons, he would have killed Reed Destro right then and there. But because of his encounter with Overhaul and learning that, kind of burning down bridges isn't the way to go, he decided to build a bridge with Reed Destro and the Meta Liberation Front and be able to have them on his side. Because let's think about this, hypothetically. If Shigaraki would have taken Reed Destro's life in that given moment, let's be honest, the entire group behind Reed Destro probably would not have joined Shigaraki. They probably would have charged Shigaraki, died, or they just would have been very angry and just been left alone or whatever. But they would have never have followed Shigaraki just because of just the savageness, the cold-blooded savageness of killing their leader like that. They would not have followed Shigaraki whatsoever. So thanks to Shigaraki sparing Reed Destro, resulted in him building up a greater army. So it shows how much he learned from his encounter with Overhaul, is that sometimes burning bridges isn't the way to go, because let's be fair, he's never gonna have a bridge built again with Overhaul, because it's like he took his arms, he took his Quark away from him, he literally, took everything from Overhaul, so it's like, yeah, it's clear that Shigaraki will never be working with Overhaul, but it's nice to see he's working with another big villain behind the scenes, and that he learned his lesson. But let's talk about Reed Destro. Reed Destro as a character, if you haven't noticed, he's all about stress. That's literally what his quirk is about. And from what we have seen already, at least displayed in this episode, is that the quirk really is a part of your personality. And if we go by what we learned with Shigaraki and how he literally has the urge to destroy, and it's literally his personality, you have Redestro that has the quirk stress, and because of stress is resulting in his hair loss and why he acts like he does, why he's driven by so much ambition to be able to achieve what he wants. But because of that weight on his shoulders, it has shackled him, and someone that should be for the freedom of meta quirks, you know, he wasn't free. And that is why when he looked at Shigaraki, someone that was the very embodiment of freedom itself, liberated from everything, he just could stand there and look in awe at Shigaraki. And that is why he bowed down, was because the best person to lead what he wants is someone that truly is free. And I feel like that's a beautiful way to kind of end Redestro's character for this arc, to kind of showcase why he stepped down and why he believes in Shigaraki and what Shigaraki stands for. Literally, freedom itself. Literally, he destroys everything, but he will allow his friends, a part of his group, to do what they want. He destroys everything and breaks it apart for they can rebuild. That is what he wants. He's not building, his allies are. So that is a big takeaway from this arc and what makes it so fantastic. So I feel like MVA is one of the best arcs of the entire series. Obviously, there's greater arcs that came out afterwards, and that is definitely something to look forward to, but I think that the way this arc was written was a nice way to give so much development to the villains with just very few episodes, very few chapters, and I think that the way Studio Bones handled this episode was good. It got everything across. Obviously, it wasn't perfect, like I said, but I feel like that this was a good episode. But I guess let's talk about some of the changes. So one of the biggest things I think everybody's going to look at when it comes to this episode is the censorship. And it's something I briefly talked about in the last episode, and it's not something I really blame Studio Bones for. You can't really expect them to show everything in an anime. You can't. It's censorship. It's just how it is. It's not necessarily the studio's fault. It's technically just how the laws are in Japan, and that's just how it has to be. Obviously, there is ways to get around this, either through black bars or having it to where they just cut the scene out and then they re-added in the BD. And this is something I kind of talked about that they most likely will do when the BDs of, you know, My Hero Academia Season 5 come out, because when you look at the core content, what they were doing with Shigaraki's decay and how they looked like they turned to stone, and then you saw a puddle of blood, that was obviously used for censorship reasons, so they might actually kind of color it in and make it look like they weren't turned to stone and actually disintegrate, to also the segment with Shigaraki's fingers. This is something to talk about. So I think many I've been seeing talk about is Shigaraki's broken fingers. Now obviously if you're an anime only, you have probably no idea what I'm about to mention, but if you look at Shigaraki's state, it's really bad. His leg looks broken, his fingers are broken, you're like, man, he's looking like Izuku right now. However, his state was much worse in the manga. Like, his fingers that looks broken in the anime, they're gone. In the manga, they're gone. Like, they're not there. They're non-existent. They're gone. So yeah, just FYI, that his fingers, he doesn't have all 5 fingers in the manga. So the broken fingers, that's not in the manga. But obviously, that's censorship reasons that they're doing. Obviously, they can probably have some weird excuse thrown in saying that they had to amputate maybe his fingers or something, and they can just do that quickly with dialogue, because that's what's going to probably happen, because he does lose his fingers. And that, I feel like, is probably the biggest thing that the censorship does that kind of takes away from the impact of everything that went on within this arc. But overall, I feel like besides that, there's nothing really to kind of stand out and complain about. One thing that does need to be mentioned is Shigaraki's quirk. And I feel like this is something that people are going to be a little bit shocked about, is that, like, holy crap, Shigaraki, he's broken, he's OP. And yeah, he's really strong, not going to lie. But the thing is I think people, if you didn't pay attention to the backstory, is that he has always been capable of this. He actually didn't go through a full awakening that people are thinking that, like, Toga went through. He actually was always capable of destroying cities and buildings in the ground around him. It's just he subconsciously held back. He held back with his memories, etc. That was something that we saw in the flashback for this episode. So he never used the full extent of what his quirk was capable of. He held back subconsciously. Now being unshackled, free, he's able to do whatever he wants. So now Shigaraki is using his fullest potential, which is what makes him utterly terrifying. So the symbol of evil, the birth of a new villain, is here at long last, and my oh my, I'm glad to finally get to see it animated. Obviously, MVA wasn't perfect, but I'm happy with this episode. I really am. It's a good episode, and I'm biased. You can call me biased, but I'm happy. I really am. But anyways, I'm going to leave it at that. You all have a wonderful day or night wherever you live. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe. If you like this video, please leave a like. And with that, guys, be safe, stay healthy. Chibi out.